I'm Mark Draper. Joining me is Dom Guiliano from Magellan Financial Group. Today we're talking about debt in the Western world. Dom, the level of debt in the Western world still looks high to me. Where are we at with the deleveraging process?
Okay, well, the level of debt is high. And the way I like to think about debt across the Western world is really to break it up into its constituent components. So think about the debt that governments have, debt that households have, debts that corporates have, and debts that financial institutions have. And the mix of those debt levels actually differs by country. So if you were to think about Australia, we've got actually quite high debt levels amongst households, but our government sector is actually really good, and financials and corporate are okay. If you think about the United States, going into the crisis, you had households and corporates and financials all had problems. Actually, the government wasn't too bad, but that's kind of reversed.
Yes.
You know, other places, Italy, where people are very worried right now, government debt levels are very high. Some financials are high, but you actually look at the corporate sector and the household sector, it's actually very low.
Right.
So just to give you a bit of flesh and a bit of flavour on where some of these numbers sit in terms of relativities, you know, government debt in Australia at the federal level is only 6% of GDP. If I contrast that to Greece, it's over 150% net debt. Italy's at 100%, the US is about 65%, Spain and Germany are at about 70%, France is at 80%. So you've got a varying range of debt levels there. Some of them really are quite high. Household debt has actually increased significantly in most places in the developed world, significantly. So
over what sort of time period?
Over the last 10 years. So if I was to look at the period from 2000 to 2010, that's what these numbers relate to, yeah. Australian housing credit was sitting at about 45% of GDP. It's gone up to 90% over a decade. You look at the UK, it's gone from about, the household debt has gone from about 100% to 150%. The US has gone from 45 to about 100%. No, the same in Spain, it's gone from 75% to 125%. It's taken us a decade to get there, right? Italy's one of the funny ones. It's only gone from 35% to 55%. We're actually not big borrowers. So there's been significant increases at the household level, even though right now most people are looking at government. Right. Corporate debt is actually pretty good. You know, all of the bad borrowers out there who were highly geared got shaken out between 2007 and 2009. You only have to think to our market. You know, yes. Centro and some of the highly geared players were kicked out. So corporate debt around the world is actually pretty good.
How are the households going to bring down their level of debt across the Western world?
Okay, well, in terms of how the deleveraging is going to take place and the impacts, well, households in many places have changed their behaviours. So they're consuming less and they're saving more. And of course, you think about the impact on an economy of that, it's going to slow down an economy. So there is a circular issue that's going on here. So governments are pulling back spending and increasing taxes to pay down the debt. Consumers are pulling back on expenditures. And the financials are deleveraging, so they're not extending credit to businesses and to households to go out and buy assets and to invest. So it's a circular thing. And you know, it's taken us a decade to get here. It's going to take us a decade to get out. There's been some excellent work and research put out by a couple of Harvard professors called Rogoff and Reinhardt. Excellent work.
Yes.
And they've done historic studies. They've looked back over several hundred years, many instances of sovereign debt crises. These things typically take a decade to work out of. We've only been in this thing for a couple of years. You know, we're going to be in this kind of slow environment for at least another half decade. These sovereign debt crises, they take a decade to get out. Common features are deflating asset prices, particularly houses, lower GDP growth, and higher unemployment. And that's exactly what we're seeing.
And so finally, as a portfolio manager, how do you position yourself to deal with that sort of environment?
Yeah, so you really have to think about the sort of consumption that is taking place and where it's taking place. So on two fronts, you know, consumer discretionary is an area that's going to be a lot weaker here. Firstly, people can't really borrow to buy, you know, white goods, new cars, etc. So consumption on that side is going to be weaker, but people still have to buy their milk and their coffee and their chocolate, etc. And so consumer staples is a lot stronger. And our exposures there in the Magellan Global Equity portfolio, you typically find things like Unilever, Kraft, Procter & Gamble. It's the stuff that people need to buy every day.
Yeah.
And the second element is, the whole deleveraging story is something which is impacting and going to impact for a long time the advanced economies, the developed economies. So you're going to see lower rates of growth and consumption in those economies, but where you are seeing good, strong activity that we'll see for many years is the emerging markets.
Right.
And so you want sensible, quality exposures to those emerging markets, and that's where some of the other stocks in our portfolio come into play. So Yum Brands, McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, Nestle, they all have excellent exposures to growth in emerging markets.
Thank you, Dom. We are in a different environment than we were 5 or 10 years ago. There are large debt levels, and we're involved in a deleveraging process over time, and investors just need to make sure they're positioned correctly for that. We'll be bringing you more information on this topic and many others through our website, so stay tuned for more information.